Thank you. Thank you for those that were enthusiastic about it. Now, I want to start with a story, though, guys. So Livy, my wife, some of you may have met her by this point. She was out shopping at a Target in America. And could you get my PowerPoint up there for me, please? That would be amazing if you know how to do that. Out shopping at a store called Target in America. Now, Target, you guys may have seen it in movies or TV shows. It's got a big red Target as its logo. I'll throw it up there as soon as it comes up. It's kind of like the size of an Asda with the upscale feel of like a Waitrose. Waitrose. Is it Tros or Tros? Tros, like a rose? Not Tros? Okay. Waitrose, that place. It's like an upscale one of those, but just kind of bigger like an Asda. And anyways, she was out there shopping one day, and she's probably in the clothing section. And when she went to Target, she typically had our kids with her. And when my kids we moved here, if you would ask them the one thing they missed about America, it was Target, surprisingly. Well, it's because they always got a juice box from Starbucks. There's a Starbucks in the front. They get their little treats and snacks. And the toy aisles just go on forever, so they loved it there. Anyway, so she's there in the clothing department, and unbeknownst to her, one of our children had gotten into one of those round clothing racks, you know, the type that have the little opening in the middle, and you can hide inside. You know, we've all been in those before at some point, I'm sure, right? And anyways, every time somebody was coming by, they were grabbing a piece of clothing and shaking it, saying, pick me, to all these confused shoppers. Yeah, it's really, really good. But after a few moments, a Target worker noticed what was happening and understandably approached my wife and gently asked her if she could keep her children more in line. And Livy, kind of not really knowing what was happening behind her and startled by the notion that her children were with her, quickly put two and two together and sheepishly said that to the Target lady, "That's not my child, that's my husband." At which case I popped out of the middle and waved at the nice Target lady, who then proceeded to whisper in Livy's ear, "I am so sorry," and walked away. So you guys had no idea what you're getting into when you hired me. But you know, I'm just acting biblically. If you guys have read Matthew 18, Jesus called a child and said, unless you act like this little child, you will not inherit the kingdom. So you know what, guys? If you want to go to heaven, just play in clothing racks as much as possible. And if you'd like to, send my wife sympathy cards, you understand her plight now and knows that she needs them. But guys, we're doing a series called It's Time to Grow Up, or Growing Up, and you can see from my story that it kind of ties in some ways. But looking at people in the Bible, men and women that have had a slump in their faith. Maybe they need a slump buster in there somewhere. Just need a pick-me-up, right? Red Bull gives you wings kind of moments. And so we're looking at those people. And now, who's ever been told to grow up before? Has anyone ever said, act your age, grow up, you need to be more mature? I'm not the only one. Thank you, Dan. Come on, Matt. I want your hand up, Matt. I want your hand up, Matt. Thank you. That we've all been there. We've all been told to grow up. And when people tell someone to grow up, though, it's not really from a physical point, right? It's not like get older right now. It's just this mentally, act your age. The culturally appropriate way to act your age, which is kind of a nebulous thing, but we kind of understand what it means. Like, don't throw a temper tantrum, right? You don't throw a temper tantrum when you don't get your way. It's okay at 3 or 4, but not so much at 30. And although my kids, they really knew. Like, if you throw a temper tantrum, you are not getting that which you are throwing a temper tantrum about, right? You got to make sure that I could not have that. But there's this dude in the Bible, and I want to see if you guys can figure out who he is by this little explanation here, who, let's say, he tattled on his brothers to make himself look good. Not really a good look. He was self-righteous. He was cocky. He was arrogant. He told his brothers that they would bow down to him someday. Anybody have any ideas? Joseph. We are looking at Joseph. Now, if he was around today, at least the 17-year-old version that we see introduced in Genesis 37, most of us would probably say, dude, just grow up. You guys might say, mate, grow up, or grow up, bruv. Right? Hey, bruv, grow up. I cannot do English accent. Whoa, bruv. No, I can't do English. But yeah, something like that. You would tell him to grow up, right? And so what we want to look at, we're looking at what happened to Joseph along the way, from where we first see him as this spoiled, whiny, entitled teen that's not having a good look. We've seen those MTV specials about kids, that Sweet 16s. It's just not a good look. What happened to him along the way that took him from that naive, spoiled teen to a prudent leader, a careful, prudent leader? Because yes, right now we're looking a lot at mental immaturity and behaviors, but lots of us were kind of stuck in a spiritual immaturity. Right? Maybe we're not stuck. Maybe we've just stayed there and we've kind of liked that lane in our life, that lane we've been in. And really this journey of Joseph, it was a spiritual journey for him, of where God molded him into that leader. And so what do we know about the journey of Joseph, right? So we know that at 17, his brother sold him into slavery to some Midianite Ishmaelite merchants for 20 shekels of silver. Now, does anybody know how much 20 shekels of silver is in today's economy? You can just throw a number at me. What do you think? 20 shekels of silver, what do you think? A fiver? A little more than a fiver. 100 pounds, good? Yeah, it's actually right about 130 pounds or so. So his brother sold him for 130 pounds. Now it is a little different. A shepherd would have made about 8 shekels a year. So, that's about 2.5 times what you'd get. But it was the going rate for a male his age. So he was sold into slavery. He was sold into the house of Potiphar by those merchants, a man described as one of Pharaoh's officials or a captain of the guard. Now, the Hebrew word used to describe Potiphar was saris. And it was commonly used in the Old Testament to describe eunuchs. Which might have been why his wife later on was trying to get a little something on the side. But also, it could have just been used in a general term to describe someone that's a court official. Now, if you don't know what a eunuch is, think of when you take your dog to the vet to get fixed, snip, snip. Okay, just in case you were wondering. And then he's thrown into jail, and between Potiphar's service and his time in jail, it was 13 years. And we know that. He was 17 when he was sold, and he was 30 when he got out of jail. But let's look at how this kid, what happens along the way that kind of brings Joseph out of this spiritual slump. And so I've got 3 slump busters that I want to show you, 3 things that I thought Joseph did along the way that really helped him. Now, the first one is the only way to win is not to play. And I'll explain that here in a minute. But let's look right now at Genesis 39, verses 1 through 4. So now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian official, was one of Pharaoh's officials. The captain of the guard bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw the Lord was with him and the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything that he owned. Now, I can't imagine this happened overnight either, since we don't have really a time scale. I'd say this is a number of years. You're not going to come into the house and instantly have the respect of everybody there. So let's say Joseph is here for a number of years, and he's seen to grow in integrity in the house, had the respect of everyone, and grew in stature. And then we get on to verse 6 through 12, where it says, "Now Joseph was well-built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, 'Come to bed with me.' But he refused. 'With me in charge,' he told her, 'my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?'" I missed that one. What is there? "And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. Now one day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants were inside. And she caught him by his cloak and said, 'Come to bed with me.' But he left his cloak in her hand, and he ran out of the house." Now, guys, sometimes all you wore in that time was a cloak with nothing underneath. So it's quite possible Joseph ran naked out of this person's house. Now, I'll touch back on that in a second. Now, I had a friend who once spent a summer working at a carnival, at a fair, working those games booths. You guys ever play some of those games that you just can never win? You know, the ones where you got to shoot the basket, got to make the ring on the bottle, you got to make the ball in the basket, around the hoop, under the net, through the hole, and you could win a prize, right? Come on, step right up, friends. You can't win if you don't play. And you hear guys trying to impress their dates with their supposed in-depth knowledge to exactly how to beat the game. And I'm one of those guys. You'll hear me saying it, but I just don't play those games because I don't want to waste my money. But sadly, for most guys that step up, they're always wrong. I mean, the games are rigged. We know the hoop, right? The basketball hoop. It's usually a little more than 10 feet tall. Regulation is 10 feet, 10 and a half feet, 11 feet. The hoop is barely the size for the basketball. The basketball is overinflated. They put a tarp over the top, so you just can't ever make it. It's all rigged against you. And one of the things my friend talked about was that there weren't many rules governing how they ran those booths. Kind of do whatever you want, kind of give your spiel, do it, but they had one rule. And that was always make the customer think they're in on the hustle. When you'd show them that proper way to throw the ring, hey, it's all on the elbow, right? Just throw it like this. Or you'd give them the underinflated basketball. And you want to make them feel like they had an edge. And even if they somehow managed to win, the cost of the prize was always less than the cost to play. You know, guys, as Christians, our enemy treats the whole world as his carnival game and shows off these prizes as things that we can win if we come and play. The only way to win, though, is not to play, is not to allow ourselves to be enticed. Guys, I'm sure that as a high-ranking official of the time, Potiphar's wife would have been a woman of influence and very desirable. Why do you think Joseph ran? Because there are times when we know that temptation is just too strong. And as a man, those temptations can be strong. Guys, when I was at university, I was dating a girl. And we were over at my house, and we may or may not have been kissing. Let's just call it praying in tongues together is what we'll call it, okay? We were doing something very spiritual together, praying in tongues. And right in the middle of our spiritual moment, she decides to whip her shirt right off. Now, I had never been in the presence of that before. Guys, and as a man, I wanted to be in the presence of that, okay? But I knew it wasn't right. And I knew where a situation like that could lead. And now, it took me longer than I like to admit, and maybe a little more praying in tongues, but I eventually got out, could you please put your shirt back on? I don't know what that encounter would have turned into if I hadn't have summoned every single fiber of my being and said that. Actually, I do know where it could have ended up. But guys, sometimes we might just need to run, because we know in those times that we want to play the game. We want the prize that we perceive to be so valuable. The enemy dangles in front of us. Maybe we have something like right now in our mind that we know has tempted us, has been something that we know we want, that we know isn't right, though. And if you've ever given in, you know what, guys? It might be fun and exciting. Like sinning, guys, if sin wasn't fun, the devil would be out of a job, right? But if you've ever given in, we find out that it's all empty promises and regret. It's smoke. And the only reason that I could get those words out to put your shirt back on was that I'd made a promise to myself and to God that not until I'm married. And I could barely hear that promise, through the temptation. I could barely hear it. But if it wasn't there, I don't know what would have happened in that moment. I mean, I know she's not God's plan for me because I'm not with her. She's not with me. I would have been just selfishly taking something. One more little analogy on this, and I might be dating myself. Anyone ever see War Games before? The movie War Games? Matthew Broderick, Ali Sheedy in their heyday. You guys know the one. Shall we play a game? Come on, all right, Andy's shaking his head. He knows that movie. It was this great scene where Matthew Broderick is trying to convince this computer that he's accidentally set out to basically do thermonuclear war against the world. He's tried to get this computer to play, you guys call it noughts and crosses, don't you? But it's tic-tac-toe. It will always be tic-tac-toe. It will never not be tic-tac-toe. But for your benefit, we'll call it noughts and crosses. So he's trying to teach the computer to play noughts and crosses with itself. And he eventually does. And so the computer, while it's preparing for thermonuclear war, it's playing noughts and crosses with itself 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000, 100,000 times, just blinking faster and faster and faster through these games. And eventually everything goes black. And the computer then pops up on the screen and it says, a strange game. The only winning move is not to play. The only way to win is not to play. Guys, there are situations that are no win for us. I mean, they have zero-sum outcomes. Like, these aren't good situations. And we might think that doing that something shady at work will get us ahead a little bit or give us a little extra money. We might think that being with that guy or that girl in that way will get them to love us or won't affect us in the long term. We might think, hey, guys, it's only a hit. It's just one bowl. It's just a line. It's not going to affect me. And I have to say that, yes, it will affect you. And yes, it can have long-lasting ramifications. Now, growing up, I didn't understand all the time why the Bible said what it said. Why does it say not to do that? Why does it say to do that? Now a lot of those I do understand. I've lived a little. I've seen why. And so many make sense now. Now, some never will. But God is doing everything he can to protect us now. Whether or not we understand it, he is working for us. He's working for you. Just know that. And know that sometimes the way to get that win for him is just not to play. Or sometimes it's to run out of the house naked, like Joseph. It's biblical. You can do it. It's okay. Slump buster number one, then. The only way to win is not to play. Number two is he looked for God in the unexpected, didn't he? Now, guys, back around the turn of the century, Germany developed a game-changing technology. Well, the turn of the 19th to 20th century, in the form of U-boats. Now, British Navy officers didn't give this much notice and thought it more of a novelty than actually something useful in battle. That was, however, until in World War I, They lost the HMS Pathfinder and Formidable. And then Britain stopped sending out their big warships when they were trying to kind of barricade Germany. They used smaller frigates and vessels to kind of blockade their ports. Well, needing to retaliate, the U-boats, they just started targeting merchant ships, civilian ships, and just decimating the waters around the UK. Now, to be fair, something I learned is they actually used to warn the boats. They would surface, target a boat, and go, hey, guys, we're going to shoot you down. You better get off. It's kind of how they did it, really. And then they stopped doing that. But I didn't realize they were so civil in their first attempts at doing this. And actually, them shooting civilian ships is how the Americans got into the war when they shot a civilian ship with 128 people on board that America didn't like. But regardless, different story. U-boats brought Britain to her knees, okay, where most of the population was lacking even basic supplies. And can you imagine the prayers of parents? If you're a parent, you know, like with your kids, you do anything for them. And to have to see them going hungry and possibly starving in some cases, can you imagine the earnest prayers that were going up to God in that time? Well, since England wasn't really equipped to handle, and for a while it basically refused to acknowledge there was a problem with submarines, they had no solutions to start with. And so they got together, and after all these different ideas, they got all of the military brass in one room, okay? Can you imagine this? Actually, it's a little further down. But after all the ideas they came up with, and one of the ideas was actually to teach seagulls to poop on periscopes. That was actually one of the ideas. I kid you not, that was what they kind of went through. The one they came up with, we're going to attack these submarines with hammers. Hammers and brown bags. So they were going to tackle this problem with hammers. And the actual strategy was to send little rowboats ahead of the incoming merchant vessels and be on the lookout for periscopes. And when one was spotted, they would covertly row. I'm not quite sure how you covertly row towards a periscope when it can just look at you, but let's pretend they're covertly rowing towards a periscope, and they would quickly put the brown bag on top and bang it with a hammer, and that was what they came up with, like whack-a-mole on the periscopes. Now, can you just imagine in your head sitting in this room with all the military brass? Let's say you've got the Prime Minister. Was it Queen Elizabeth, World War I? Is that right? Yeah, am I off in that? So king or queen? Let's just say Queen Elizabeth is there, or the king. The king. Let's say the king is in there, and someone raises their hands and offers, "What about brown bags and hammers?" You know, I just can imagine that in my head how that might have gone over. But I mean, granted, in a room where pooping seagulls was an option, it might have just paved the way for this one to come out a lot easier. But how effective this tactic was, it's not entirely clear, but what we do know is that it was effective enough for one officer to start employing and enlisting blacksmiths to go out in the boats with the sailors. And his thought processes was, well, they've got more accurate and strong hammering ability, and so they can go with our sailors and kind of whack-a-mole on these periscopes. And that went on for some time. Now, of course, more technology came out, sophisticated technology, more than pooping seagulls or hammers, were developed to kind of attack that, and that became obsolete. But never forget, for a brief and glorious time in history, guys, there was a guy who could claim his job was to hunt submarines with a giant hammer. I want that on my CV. Can you imagine like sitting in an interview and being, I see you were in the church choir. Oh, and you hunted submarines with hammers. That must have been fun. You know, I don't know, it'd be amazing. I would kill to have that on my CV. But again, here's this though. What all that comes to is that the prayers of a nation were answered by God in the form of taking down the mighty U-boat with hammers and brown bags. Guys, you got to look for God in the unexpected. Because if you aren't looking there, you're going to miss him, because that's where he operates more than anything. Okay, let's recap where we last saw Joseph. So Joseph was last seen running naked out of Potiphar's house. What happened after that is Potiphar's wife then said, well, he tried to sleep with me. He didn't really have a good case for himself as he's running out of the house naked, and Potiphar had him thrown in jail. So now for Joseph, trying to be a stand-up dude, trying to work for God, yeah, I would expect some people to get bitter, right? Like what gives God? I was sold into slavery, and then I still served you. I still did good for you, and now I'm thrown in jail. What the what, God? Like what is going on? But let's see how Joseph handled that in Genesis 39, verses 20 through 23. So Joseph's masters took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Now, I'm not sure why it specified king's prisoners, and I'm kind of torn between whether that would be a place of a lot of torture, you know, where the king wanted the worst to go, like Alcatraz, but with torture, or if that's like the cushy white collar with tennis courts prison, but for some reason it did make sure to specify king's prisoners. But anyways, he's in the king's prisoners' prison, and while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And so the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Now, generally in the Bible, when it says the Lord was with, fill in the blank, it's generally because that person is doing everything they can to follow the Lord as well. It wasn't like God was having to chase Joseph and tap him on the shoulder being like, hey, bro, hey, I'm right here, God of the universe. No, it's because Joseph was still following God and still looking for God in the prison. How do you handle God in that unexpected moment? You got to look for him. And what Joseph did is he made sure he was looking for God in these unexpected places. So for Joseph so far, he knows the only way to win is not to play, and then to look for God in the unexpected. And that brings us to number 3, and that's attempt great things for God and expect great things from God. Now, a man once came to Alexander the Great and was somehow able to grant an audience with this powerful, powerful man. And he told him of his financial distress, that his businesses were failing, and he was still trying to support the workers, and his family was having a hard time and possibly starving. And after his tale, it moved Alexander. And he told his treasurer to give this man whatever he wants. Now, upon hearing this, the man went silent for a moment. And then he spoke, and he asked for 10,000 talents of gold. Now, 10,000 pounds, decent amount of money. 10,000 talents, well, 1 talent is between 50 and 90 pounds, all right? That's just 1 talent. A pound has 16 ounces. Every ounce is worth 1,500 pounds. In today's kind of economic climate, he was asking for between 14 and 26 billion dollars, about 11 to 21 billion pounds. So, not surprisingly, the treasurer was taken aback, and Alexander was momently startled. But then Alexander thought for a moment, and he said, "Give the man what he asked for he complimented me by taking me at my word." Like, wow. You know, guys, but we serve a God who is the same and tells us the same thing. I mean, let's say you were in a point of complete financial meltdown, right? You didn't have enough money to feed yourself, let alone pay bills. And somehow Jeff Bezos, owner of Amazon, richest man in the world, hears about your plight, knocks on your door, and says, "How can I help you? What can I do for you?" What would you say? I know for me, guys, I have a hard time asking for money. He'd have to really insist, "Whatever you want, Shaun, whatever you want, Andy, whatever you want, Marcus." What would you say? Now, I might just say, "Hey, can I just enough to get by for the month, right? Hey, can I just have maybe just a month's rent, 2 months' rent so I can get back on my feet?" How many of us would have the gall to ask for like $15 billion, 15 billion pounds? And how many of us would then expect to receive that, right? We think we get laughed at. We don't understand that we are told to expect great things. We are promised to see great things. Now, I'm not going all Joel Osteen here and saying that being a Christian, you're going to be rich. That's not what I'm saying. That's far from the point. Let's look at another passage that kind of talks about this. So as Jesus was approaching Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the road begging. Now, hearing the crowd go by, he began to inquire, "Hey, who is that? Who is that that's going by?" And they told him that it was Jesus of Nazareth. And so he called out saying, "Hey, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And the people with him, they stopped him and said, she's quiet. But he kept crying out all the more, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And so Jesus stopped and commanded the man be brought over. And when he came near, he questioned him, and he said, "What do you want me to do for you?" Now, why do you think Jesus asked the man, "What do you want me to do for you?" I mean, Jesus knows what this blind man in his heart probably wants. But how would most of us answer that question in that blind man's position? Will we answer it the same way we answered Jeff Bezos? Jesus, can I just have a couple bucks to get by, a couple pounds just to make it through the month? I'm hungry. Could you help me with some food? Or Jesus, "Hey, you know what, Jesus, just be part of my day. Hey, Jesus, just stay here with me for a little bit. Jesus, isn't that how we normally pray? God, just be here with us." And he's like, "Hey, dude, I'm right here, all right? Why do you keep asking me that? I'm with you. Like, what? Ask something else." The reason Jesus asked is this. Doesn't he say in the Bible, call unto me and I will answer you and tell you and show you great things that you don't know. First, there's that qualifier, is that we have to ask, right? We have to call. We have to ask that. We forget that we have a God that desires to show us his glory, his majesty, and his power. He tells us to test him in such things. And so this blind beggar, when asked that question, what can I do for you? What do you want? This blind beggar has the gall to ask Jesus for a miracle that could never happen. He asks to be healed. He asks for the impossible. And Jesus has the nerve to answer and grant that request. Attempt great things for God. Expect great things from God. So where are we in Joseph, right? So Joseph was in jail, thrown in jail in the king's prison. He spends some time there. He interprets some dreams. Pharaoh hears about this. Pharaoh has some bad dreams that's given him all kinds of fits. And so then Pharaoh hears about it and calls for Joseph. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I've heard it said that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I can't do it, Joseph replied, but God will give Pharaoh the answers he desires. Now, Joseph is standing before a man that literally holds his life in his hands. You displease a Pharaoh, and you're dead. It's that simple. The Egyptians had their gods. Joseph, bringing his God into the conversation, could have upset Pharaoh and left him dead. Lots of things in this encounter could have left Joseph dead. But he knew his God. And he had seen how that God works. And he knew that when he attempted great things for God, he could expect to see great things from God. How did he answer that? I can't do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answers he desires. He knew God would come through in that crazy time. Do you? Do you know that God not might, not possibly, but will come through for you if you step out for him? The same thing Joseph showed us thousands of years ago still applies to you today. You want to grow in your faith. You want to see God move and show you the life that he's had for you since your first day on this earth. Well, here it is. Handle your temptations like Joseph. Only way to win is not to play. Expect to see God in crazy places like Joseph did, and know that God will show up when you step out for him. Attempt great things and expect great things. Now, I don't know if this following statement is heretical or not. I actually just added it about 10 minutes before we started today. And that's in the economy of this world and the way that God has made it, in the spreading of the word for him and living the life that God has called you. One, we can't do it without him. But two, he can't do it without us, right? And bringing people to the church, and introducing people to God, and being the hands and feet of Jesus. Not that God couldn't do it, but the way that he's made this, the way that he's made us, the ways that he's made us part of his body, as his people, as his hands, as his feet. That's the way God made it. And that's why God shows us that through amazing people like Joseph, how to live the best possible life, how to make sure that we're always finding our way back to him when we get lost, and staying with him and walking with him. Let me just pray. Father, I just thank you so much, Dad, for the amazing, amazing examples in the Bible that you give us of those that were in a slump, Father, or just needed to grow up, and you've walked with them. They're not perfect examples, but they're broken people like we are, Dad. And you've shown how they follow you and how they can grow for you and how they can become these amazing leaders of faith for you. And if we're struggling with this spiritual immaturity, Father, and just need that spiritual 2x4 upside the head, God, I pray you bring it. Bring us to a place that shows us what we need to do for you and reminds us that, God, sometimes we got to run, we got to not play. Reminds us to look for you in all those unexpected places, because that's where you thrive, that's where you work. And to realize that all we got to do is step out for you, expecting you to come, Father, and you'll come. Dad, you are an amazing God, yesterday with Joseph, today, and into our future, and that will never stop. Dad, we love you, and we thank you. And in your Son, Jesus' name, we pray. Amen.